This is Novel Marketing, the longest running book marketing podcast in the world.
I am James L. Rubart, but you can call me Jim.
I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr.
And in this episode, we're going to talk to you guys about why pruning your life might be the most important move you'll ever make.
We have a big announcement, so stick around. If you're wondering why the episodes after this one are different, you have to listen to this one to know what and why. But first, I'd probably explain a little bit about how pruning works. There's a tree here in Austin called the Arizona ash tree. And these trees, they're pretty, they grow really fast, and they're very popular in new subdivisions. But the problem is that they grow too fast and they grow too big, and they have a bad habit of splitting in two or dropping whole limbs, which is really bad if you have a car underneath one of those major branches. Not that we would know, or anyone in the subdivision that I grew up in would know. And it's not uncommon for homeowners to call these Arizona trash trees after it destroys their car or a corner of their house. And the solution is to cut some of the healthy limbs off of the tree from time to time. My parents have an Arizona ash tree in their front yard. I have an Arizona ash tree in my front yard. And my parents' ash tree is way old. And the reason why it has not destroyed any of their vehicles is because they have hacked and slashed at that thing, keeping it to a reasonable size. So Arizona ash trees' ambitions far exceed their ability to support their own branches and limbs. So you have to take active measures to keep the tree from getting too big. And it's not just with trees. There's a lot of reasons why pruning is helpful in agriculture, right? To increase the structural strength of the remaining plant, like we talked about with the ash tree, but also to increase fruit production, right? If you have a fruit tree, and Jim, you are surrounded by apple trees.
Yeah, we're surrounded by apple trees, but we actually have 5 apple trees in our yard, and the next door neighbor has his lawn mowed. A guy comes, Ramon, and mows it every 2 weeks, and Ramon shuffled over the other day, and he's looking at our apple trees, and he just starts grabbing these apples and pulling them off the tree. I'm like, what are you doing? Well, I'm thinning. You have to thin. If you want to get a good crop of apples, you have to take these off. And then, of course, every year we have our apple trees pruned. Every year, spring, they come and prune the trees back.
Yeah, I remember when I visited you, we drove past just miles and miles of apple orchards. You're really living the life up there in Eastern Washington. And I was stunned, though, at how short and squat and ugly these apple trees were. Like, none of them were very big and tall. They weren't what you think of as a big, beautiful apple tree, because the purpose of those trees isn't to be visually appealing. It's to produce big, visually appealing apples, which means putting energy towards the fruit, not towards the branches. And it's also true with flowers. If any of you have flowering plants like roses, there's a lot to be said about pruning those. And then another reason to prune is for the aesthetic shape of the tree. If you want to have your tree look just so, you've got to prune to make it happen that way, and often over time to kind of shape the tree. So if the goal of the tree is to look good, you have to prune. And then finally, and this is often the most important reason, it's to cut off diseased or unhealthy limbs. If you have an infection in one limb of the tree, it can spread to the rest of the tree and kill it. And this is even true with limbs on humans. So back in the American Civil War, before they had penicillin, they amputated limbs all the time to save the patient. And so you may be wondering, what does this have to do with books and the Novel Marketing Podcast?
The Pruning Marketing Podcast.
Yeah, the Pruning Marketing Podcast. Well, that same principle of pruning applies to our lives, not in a physical sense. Hopefully none of you are, facing an amputation, but the activities that we do can become like those branches on the tree that take away energy from the fruit. And Jim and I have both been walking this journey. I don't think we both realized that the other one was going through it.
No, I don't think we did either. We really didn't. And it wasn't until recently we came together and said, oh my gosh, we're both walking the same path.
Yeah. And I would like to say that as the enlightened guru on the top of the mountain, I looked upon my life and I saw that I was doing too much, and I calmly started the pruning process. But sadly, that is not what happened. I had a mental breakdown. I've been having a series of small mental breakdowns. I finally had a major mental breakdown, which for an entire day I could not get out of bed. Like I mentally just couldn't function. I couldn't operate. And it's like something has gone wrong. And so I put together a list after one of the smaller mental breakdowns, a list of responsibilities and titles that I had, because I had all these business cards. And so I'm going to share with you that list of where I was a couple of months ago. So brace yourself. So I was the CEO of Author Media Hosting. I was the co-host of Novel Marketing. I was a keynote speaker with my own speaking sole proprietorship. I was a literary agent with the Steve Lobby Agency. I was an instructor with the Author Media courses. I was the vice president of the Christian Writers Institute. I was a podcast host of the Christian Publishing Show. I was the CEO of Castle Media Podcast Production. I was a podcasting, publishing, and marketing consultant. People would hire me on an hourly basis. I was a podcast host of Liberty Buzzer, the podcast host of Creative Funding Show, the author of Courtship in Crisis, organizer of the Austin Entrepreneurs Meetup Group, a board member of Waymakers International, an organizer of the Austin Christian Writers Meetup Group, product owner of the MyBook plugins, organizer for the Austin Board Game Designers Meetup Group, co-organizer of the Austin Podcasters Meetup Group, and a blogger on thomasumstadt.com and authormedia.com.
Breathe.
Oh, and a husband and a father. Oh, yeah, that too. Of a new baby, a newborn baby, which, let me tell you, they require a lot of work. My daughter is so busy. We leave her alone for 2 minutes and she will make her way to the nearest bookshelf and pull out all of the books that she can reach. Now that she can stand up on her own, she now has access to 2 whole bookshelves worth of books. And if we leave her alone for 5 minutes, she'll start turning the pages and tearing them accidentally. She's very into books, but she likes to eat the pages, which is non-ideal. So it was too much. I was like that Arizona ash tree. And I basically was splitting because, they will prune themselves eventually with big limbs falling off. And someone asked me, right before this, how do you do everything? You're doing all of these things. And I almost told her, I do it by failing at most of it, most of the time. But I didn't have the heart to tell her that, but that was the truth. I was failing at most of it, most of the time. And you'd think that with all of those activities, I would be, flush with cash and wealthy and happy and prosperous, but no. I was having all of these branches and not very much fruit. So over the last several months, I've started hacking away, and my inspiration was this tree I came across in Switzerland, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's out in front of this old chapel. The chapel that it was in front of was like 100 or 150 years old. Europe, everything is really old, but the tree was 700 years old. So this is like a giant 700-year-old tree, and they had pruned this thing down to its nubs, and yet it was bursting with new growth. Those nubs that they trimmed down to were bursting with new branches, and apparently it was to keep this 7-year-old tree from splitting in half because it had gotten so big. And so I realized that I was that tree, way too many branches. And so I've started cutting things. I stepped down as a podcast host of Liberty Buzzer and the Creative Funding Show. Those podcasts still exist, but we're not creating any new episodes. I stepped down as the organizer from the Austin Entrepreneurs Meetup, the Christian Writers Meetup, and the Austin Board Game Designers Meetup. I stepped down as a board member of Waymakers International, and I stepped down as a literary agent. So some of you may have noticed our intro change. We don't have the intro guy anymore. The main reason was he was no longer telling the truth. I am no longer a literary agent, so we couldn't run the intro. So we've been doing our own. And then more painfully, I put my book, Courtship in Crisis, on retirement, kind of indefinite hiatus. So people can still buy the book, but I'm now turning down press inquiries and podcast interviews about the book, which is hard to do. It is really hard to turn down somebody inviting you to come on their podcast to talk about your book. But I have to say no to things in order to say yes to other things. And I sold the MyBook plugins to Stormhill Media. So MyBook Table, MyBook Progress, they still exist. You can still buy them, but they're maintained by a different company. And our patrons still get discounts. So I made sure to negotiate for that. So for you, nothing is changing. But for me, I am no longer a point of support. People no longer come to me with their tech support questions for MyBook Table. And I no longer get the kind of money that I used to get from those plugins. And so one way to think of this in the pruning process, which I will say has been very painful psychologically, cutting these things that I helped create, like the Austin Board Game Designers Meetup. I created that. That started with 0 members. And now it's up to like 600 members, 700 members. And our members have gone on to publish board games. And it's a very vibrant, maybe one of the most vibrant board game design meetups in the country in terms of how many members. And yet it was completely outside of my wheelhouse of things I should be doing. It's not at all synergistic with the writing stuff or the marketing stuff or really any of the rest of it. And so another way to think of this is that you're saying yes to the branches that remain. By cutting these responsibilities, I'll have more energy for the things that are not getting cut. And kind of moving forward, what is, and I'm not where I want to be yet. Like, I'm wanting to cut more things. My goal is by the time I turn 35, I want to have one business card, which seems silly, but I haven't had one business card in years. I've always had multiple business cards for different aspects of my life. And I feel like I'm down to 2 right now. But what I enjoy doing is teaching. And so the things that are remaining are courses, hosting podcasts, and other things around teaching. And, this may fail. If my courses don't sell, this may end in disaster. But I'm hoping that with more energy to put into podcasting and course creation, that I'll be able to compensate for all of the lost revenue of all those other things I was doing.
Thomas, when you say it might end in disaster, define disaster for me?
Disaster would be financial disaster, where it doesn't cover the expenses of my growing family. Because we have another baby on the way, and baby number 1 is eating real food now, and which is baby food is surprisingly expensive, especially for how little of it you're buying.
And how little of it they eat and how much they spit out.
Yeah. It's like, don't you spit out this food. This cost me a fortune.
Exactly.
You liked this yesterday. What's going on?
And I knew that when you said disaster, you meant financially, but I wanted to point that out because I don't think it can end in disaster. The fact that you've taken these things off your plate emotionally, pretty soon you're going to be in a much healthier place. And that healthiness translates to Margaret. It translates to Mercy. And if the courses don't sell, big deal. You're enough of an entrepreneur and you're a bright enough guy that you're going to find something else to do that still fits in your wheelhouse. But honestly, I don't see how they can fail. You're so good at it. And now having the energy to focus on it, both the time and the emotional energy, I'm excited to see where that's going to go for you.
Well, I appreciate your optimism, and I hope you're right. So now you also have been going through a season of pruning. So walk us through what that's been like.
Yeah, for me, it's funny because people my age are starting to think about retirement. And one of the questions is always, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do during retirement? And I always look at them with this befuddled look on my face, Thomas, because it's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? If I took away all my professional responsibilities today, Thomas, I would not have enough time to do everything I want to do. I'm a guitar player. I love dirt bike riding. I love sleight of hand magic. I love water skiing. I love photography. I love golf. I love scuba diving. I love pickleball. And the list goes on. I enjoy doing all those things. So hobbies, filling my time once I retire is not going to be a problem. I don't ever see myself retiring because I actually enjoy the things I do professionally. But that's the problem. I have all these hobbies I enjoy. Well, professionally, I have all these things I enjoy doing as well. So I don't know if it's that entrepreneurial mindset, but I see an idea and I just like, oh, I want to try that. I want to try that. I want to try that. And Darcy, we've been married over 30 years now. And for 30 years, she's been saying, Jim, you have so much on your plate. And my reaction has always been, no, I don't. I'm not doing that much. I was blind to the fact that I'm doing all these things. And Darcy would point it out to me, but it would never sink in and I'd never make any changes on that. And so consequently, my plate was always jam-packed full. And at the start of this year, some people do this where they pick a phrase or a word or something to personify the year. And for me this year, Thomas, I really felt like it had to be big rocks. And concentrating on those big rocks in my life instead of all those little pebbles and the sand that fill up so much of people's lives. And so that was the start of the year, big rocks. And I didn't realize that as the year went on, that I was going to have to get rid of some of my big rocks. I thought, no, just concentrate on the big rocks. I didn't expect it to be, yeah, but if you really want to concentrate on only the most important big rocks, you've got to get rid of some other big rocks that aren't quite as big. And similar to you, most people have one business card. They have one job. And as I started looking at and listing out the things that I was doing on a consistent basis, I'm doing editing for authors, speaking, writing back cover copy, one-on-one consulting, website building, narrating audiobooks, the Rubart Writing Academy, and my novel writing plus. And a lot of people don't know this. I've had a company since 1994 called JR2 Marketing, where I'm doing marketing for businesses, retail clients, this sort of thing, branding, consulting, radio campaigns, TV campaigns. So that's going on as well. And I started to look at this. And I thought, Jim, you're insane. You cannot keep this up. And what has happened throughout this year, Thomas, is 3 of my big rocks have been ramping up. I've been narrating audiobooks for a while now. Well, more and more people are wanting me to narrate their audiobooks. And so that's ramping up. The Rubart Writing Academy, that has been ramping up, and more energy and time has been going into that. And then finally, the other thing, and a lot of people don't know this, but people say, well, when's your next book coming out? And for the last little while here, I've had to say, I don't know, because I stopped writing. At the start of this year, I called my agent and I called my editor and I said, I just need to take a break. It's been wonderful. I've had a contract for 10 years straight now, but I just need to take that pressure off of myself and take a year off. And so I've been doing that. And here's the thing that surprised me, Thomas. I thought, well, 2019, I'm not going to be writing books. So I'm going to have all this time. And it turned out not to be the case. And that's when I really realized, oh my gosh, you took a big rock away and you still don't have the time you need. You got to start pruning as well. And I guess a great illustration of that is OCW, the conference you and I were at together last week, where you watched me go from mentoring appointment to teaching my class to having a lunch with my agent who came down to getting ready, writing the script for the the Cascade Awards, to doing the Cascade Awards. And you were kind of looking at me like, Jim, and then we did a podcast. I raced over and we did a quick podcast. And I think you were able to see the label on the bottle from the outside and just go, Jim, you're going to fry yourself. And I did. After the conference, Darcy and I went to Cannon Beach for a couple of days. And for the first day and a half, I just kind of laid there and drooled as I caught up emotionally to what had been going on.
Staring at the paint and wondering why it's so interesting, so compelling. Your brain just needs a break. Exactly.
So yeah, that was kind of the final piece of the puzzle, realizing I have got to do some pruning and cut some things.
So what did you learn during that process? What was the epiphany that you had as you were staring off into space?
A number of things. The movie City Slickers comes to mind, where it currently says one thing. You got to choose one thing. And I don't think that people like you and I are ever going to be able to do just one thing. We have interest, but it certainly is cutting it down to a reasonable level of plates. There are some people that can spin 6 plates. I guess what I've learned is I'm not one of those people. I can spin 3 and be good with it. The other thing that I've been trying to do, Thomas, and this is hard for me, is to use the most powerful word in the English language, which is no. And I'm a people pleaser. I don't want to disappoint people. And so, you want to interview me? Great. You want me to write an article for you? Sure. You want me to meet you for coffee? No problem. Well, you say yes to all those things. And I'm definitely realizing I'm a nickel and dime guy where, it's just a nickel. Yeah, Jim, but it's 3,000 nickels. That's a problem. That adds up really quickly. And then I realized, and I guess this is coming to the announcement that you and I are going to make, is I thought long and hard about novel marketing. And I realized the reason I love doing the show, most of all, that far outweighs anything else, is being with you and hanging out with you and our friendship. That's the main reason I love doing the show. And I thought, oh man, Jim, I'm not sure if that's a good enough reason to continue putting the time and energy into the show. So with that as an intro, Thomas, why don't you describe what we are going to do?
Yeah, so Jim is going to step back from being a regular guest.
Not down, back.
Yeah, yeah, as a regular guest on the podcast. So he's not going away. We'll have him as it'll be like a TV show where one of the main characters goes off to do a movie and they're guest starring. From every once in a while they'll come back for an episode, but they're not in every episode. So I'll still be doing the show. The show's not going away, and I'll still be hosting every show, but Jim will be stepping back. The current plan is every other month he'll do an episode here, and then every other month he'll do an episode on my other podcast, the Christian Publishing Show, which is more craft focused and is more explicitly Christian. The audience for this is very broad, whereas that is a more narrowly focused podcast. And hopefully, Jim, that will give you more time for the things that remain. So what are some of the things that will remain that you're going to be focusing on?
Yeah, the main things I'm going to focus on is the Rhubarb Writing Academy, the narration, narrating other people's audiobooks, and then writing, getting back to, starting to stir inside me. I want to start writing another novel. So I'm excited about that. And here's what's interesting, Thomas, and that is the aftermath. It wasn't more than a few days after we talked about this that you happened to be talking to Steve Lobby, and you told him what I was thinking. And Steve goes, well, gosh, I should talk to Jim about narrating books for Enclave. And so boom, already something fills that void where you would not have had that conversation with Steve if you and I had not had this conversation and I had not done some pruning. I'm really excited about doing courses with you. And we probably wouldn't have taken action on that if I hadn't done some pruning. And then the final thing is, emotionally, I realized when you and I talked and made this decision, I had a relief. It was like, oh, that was the right thing to step down from or step back from. Emotionally, I just felt a weight off my shoulders. And then, of course, I talked to Darcy about it, and she's like, oh my gosh, I feel so good about that. It brings her relief too, because, she and I are one. So the opportunities cannot come unless you do some pruning. And so I guess my encouragement to those of you out there are going, oh, wow, I know I need to prune as well. And it can be it's not necessarily just your business life. It could be your personal life as well, where you say, you know what, as harsh as this is to say, I don't have time for this relationship anymore because I have these other things I want to do. So I guess those are some of the good things that have come out of it in the aftermath. And a couple of books that I can recommend if you're saying, wow, Jim, Thomas, you guys have pruned. I know I need to prune. One is called 1 Month to Live. And this is a book that we'll put in the show notes, 30 Days to a No Regret Life. And then the other book I've been going through is by Michael Hyatt called Free to Focus. And again, both those books I think can be real helpful on your journey of pruning, of concentrating on those big rocks, and even potentially getting rid of some of your big rocks.
Yeah, it's a painful process. And now that we are kind of slightly on the other side of some of the pruning, the pain you forget really quickly, but
yeah.
Like in the moment, it's really painful.
It's hard.
A lot like pulling out a splinter. I remember the conversation I had when I sat down with as an agent, right? Because I just gotten started as an agent, and everyone was telling me, "Oh, Thomas, you're going to be the best agent ever," and I was just miserable. I did not enjoy being in the middle of email conversations and just dealing with email all the time. For me, that was like the special hell. I was like, no, please, too much email. And yet that's exactly what being an agent and being a good agent revolves. But still saying no and saying goodbye to my clients who I came to really like was really painful at the time. But there was this great sense of relief afterwards. So like this burden, this is just this emotional burden that I was carrying around. Because for me, the emotional burden was compounded by the fact that I felt like I was failing everyone around me. And I still feel like that, frankly. I don't yet feel like I am a success. Like, I don't feel like I'm suitably providing for my family, and I don't feel like I'm bringing in the wins that I need to be bringing in. But the amount of feeling like a failure is gone down with each of these areas that I've kind of given away or cut down. I don't feel like a failure in those areas. Because I'm not doing them anymore. Not because I started winning, but because I just stopped trying, so to speak, in that focus. But that cutting is painful. And, we've been doing this for a long time. We started back in 2013 when no one was doing this. There were some people had started book marketing podcasts and they kind of pod faded. And there was some indie publishing podcasts that, by true pioneers like Joanna Penn that were kind of on the whole process of getting published and marketing and branding and writing and, very broad focused podcast. But a podcast focused on just fiction, no one was doing. And we've since expanded. We let in our nonfiction brothers and sisters to the fold. But this if you think about it, 200 episodes at 30 minutes an episode, maybe 20 to 30 minutes an episode, that's hundreds of hours of talking into a microphone, not to mention all of the time preparing. And that's a huge investment that you've made, not just with me, but also with all of our listeners who have really benefited from all of your experience, both as a writer and as a professional marketer and as a radio person.
And let me say one more thing, Thomas, about the pruning process. The hardest part for me with stepping back from novel marketing, the biggest issue for me was disappointing you. And so I dreaded having that conversation and telling you that. And, you handled it amazing with grace and really good things came out of it. But what I realized in the process is, by stepping back and concentrating on one episode and really making that a killer episode, it's going to be better for the show. It's going to be better for you. Doing it that way than continuing on trying to spin this plate that I just don't have bandwidth to spin.
Yeah. And, those episodes will be amazing, and they'll come from a place of you being able to do a lot of things and experiment with things that you weren't able to do when you had an episode to grind out every week. Cause it's, every week it's a new topic. It's a lot of work doing the show, especially now that we've kind of expanded the show where there's the Facebook group and there's lots of action on the Facebook group and there's patrons and they're asking questions. And there's a lot of moving parts to the podcast now. And it's a lot more work than it used to be when we would just turn on the mic and talk for 15 minutes and then shut up and go away. The podcast has grown in terms of commitment, but, if you've enjoyed Jim and you want to say thank you, we'll have you can leave a comment on novelmarketing.com, or you can leave a review if you want. We still get all of those reviews sent to us. And if you have been putting off for the last 204 episodes leaving a review, now is the time. Say something nice about Jim in the review, or something that you've taken away. And so, and as I kind of think about what the future of the show is going to look like, I'm not entirely sure moving forward. I've had some ideas of kind of playing with the format a little bit. So I'll be experimenting with that, and I very much appreciate your feedback on as I play with things, what works and what doesn't work, as we try to find ways of filling the gym-shaped hole in the show. One thing, if you want to help, that will be very helpful is calling our listener helpline and leaving voicemails. And we have that phone number on our contact page on Novel Marketing, and it's going to be in every episode moving forward. But part of the gym-shaped hole will be probably replaced with you, our listener, leaving questions. And I may have a question segment at the end where I just answer a bunch of smaller questions. I'll probably be answering more questions at the beginning. Still playing with how to make that work. We used to do question Q&A extravaganzas back in the pre-100, back in the double-digit days of the show. And those were good, but they didn't have good staying power. People wouldn't go back and listen to them because they didn't know what questions are being answered. So I'm still navigating all of that. And if any of you have ideas, I'd be very happy to hear your ideas. Now is the time, because everything is in flux. But Jim, I just want to say on behalf of our listeners how great it's been having you on the show, and that I totally understand why you're stepping down, because I'm right there. Right? I've had to step down from a lot of things, and while it's tough, it's the right thing to do. And I'm glad that you're not going away altogether. And I'm looking forward to the episodes we'll keep doing together. It's endings are hard. Endings, especially when it's a good thing that's coming to an end.
Yeah. So, Thomas, this is something I said to Darcy the other day, and she said, "Have you told Thomas that?" And I said, "No." And so here, I'll tell it to you so everyone can hear it. And that is, I can't think of I've had a lot of partnerships over the years, and yours has been one of the best I have ever had working with you on this. So thank you for being certainly an amazing business partner, but even more than that, being an amazing friend.
Yeah. What y'all don't know is that Jim and I chit chat for like an hour before every episode. And we're always like, we got to do the episodes. Like, yeah, but talking to you is so much fun. And I'm gonna really miss that. We're going to have to invent things. We'll create some courses, and we'll have opportunities.
Courses are coming.
We're creating some cool courses. And by the way, those courses you can buy will be when we release them, you'll be able to buy them separately, but some of them will be bundled into the 5-year plan, which will make the 5-year plan more expensive. But if you buy the 5-year plan now, you're going to get the courses that get bundled into the plan. You'll get those for free. Yeah,
that's an important thing. So those of you who have already bought the 5-year plan to becoming a best-selling author, you will get these additional courses for free added in. And those of you who buy now before the price gets up will also be grandfathered in. So if you've been considering it, this is probably a great time to pick that up.
Yeah. And so anyway, we'll have links to that in the show notes. And another thing we wanted to especially thank was our patrons for helping us level up the show. And normally we have a featured patron of the episode, but we thought it'd be a cool idea to feature all of our top level patrons.
So this is not every patron, but it is our top level patrons that we'd just like to give a shout out to.
And those patrons are
Carrie Dawes,
Shatona Havig,
Cheryl Elton,
C.L. Peterson,
David Winters,
Deborah Diaz,
Eloise White,
Jennifer Leo,
Julia Darcy,
Kate Harvey,
Michael Jack Webb,
Molly Jo Reilly,
Nan Rinella,
Peter DeHaan,
Tisha Martin,
and Tyler L. Jones.
Thank you. We appreciate you guys so much. And we appreciate the rest of our patrons, but these are the ones that are at the top level. And again, you have made many things possible, namely this show and all the other things we've been able to do. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of you. And I know this is a sad episode. Jim's sad, I'm sad. But it will be good in the long run. And hopefully the show will be, it'll be different, but hopefully it'll be better. And the episodes with Jim will definitely be better because we will have a lot more energy. The branches that will remain hopefully will make very big, juicy, and delicious apples or whatever fruit. Novel marketings, little novels. Perhaps mandarin oranges or something. I don't know.
Indeed. And again, if you have a question you would like to see on the show, call the listener helpline, which is 512-827-8377. And you can also send a high quality recording. Just go to novelmarketing.com/connect.
And you have been listening to James L. Rubart for the last time as a regular co-host, but not for the last time. He will return.
I'll be back.
He's like Thanos. Thanos will return in the next, well, not like Thanos, I guess, but like Thanos in the movie. Anyway, moving on. Thomas Umstattd Jr. on the Novel Marketing Podcast, giving you innovative ideas on how to promote yourself and your writing offline, online, and everywhere in between. Thanks for listening.